Guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, Neighbor Karen calls 911 on firefighters putting out a fire. Demands they don't park on her property. I moved about a year ago and while I love my new house, the one thing I hate is the woman that lives next door. If she was part of the house tour, I don't think anybody would have ever purchased this house. I saw a clip once of The Simpsons where they are trying to sell the house next to him and the people take one look at Homer and run away. That is what I wish happened, because then I wouldn't be stuck here living next to a Karen that seems to put all the others to shame. When I first moved in, I tried to be friendly to all of the neighbors, but Karen just wanted to get off on the wrong foot right away. She told me that the people that used to live where I did let her borrow things like water and electric all the time and it shouldn't be a problem for me to do the same. I found this very odd for a first meeting and politely told her that I wasn't comfortable doing that since I was trying to keep both of those bills low. From there it just got worse, and she tried to take every opportunity to find something to complain about. One smaller example was that I had a small party at my house one day that was made up of me and a few friends. It wasn't a loud crazy party, we were inside playing board games and having dinner. I know, I'm very exciting. Anyway, she came banging on the door screaming that she didn't okay any party and that I should know better to do something like that without getting written permission from my neighbors. Just so you know, that is not a thing, and she just wanted to cause problems. Other than that, she is a pretty typical Karen who acts entitled and like she is better than everybody else despite not having things that are much nicer than others. Still, she finds ways to put people down and she is generally hated or ignored by everyone else on the block. From what I heard, she was divorced and didn't get the kids, which honestly doesn't shock me after the amount of Karen stories here that I have read from other people. The one thing I was warned was that she hated people parking in front of her house, and if I did it, I would most likely end up getting towed. I knew that she didn't own the street, but I didn't want to deal with any of that, so I just never parked there. One day I had a small kitchen fire because I had a stove gas leak that I didn't know about, and when I finally got it to ignite it made a small boom. It wasn't too bad, but it got on the curtains, and after one panicked phone call the fire department was there to put it out while I kept apologizing for magically not knowing I had a gas leak. They told me that it happened all the time, but I to this day don't know if they were just trying to make a frazzled me feel better. Out of nowhere though, Karen comes running out of her house and starts yelling at the firefighter for parking in front of her house. An important little note is that I had some work being done and the area in front of my house was kind of destroyed until it was going to be completed. The town had to check a pipe, so they tore up that section and basically it wasn't usable. Because of that, the firefighters ended up parking in front of neighbor's house instead of mine. Karen, you get this big thing off of my property right this second or I am going to make sure that you all rot in jail. Firefighter, Miss, calm down. This is an active fire scene, and you need to return to your house now. Karen, I am going to call the police on you because you are parked on my property without my permission. Firefighter, the street is public property, and you need to back off and let us work. Well, she actually ended up calling the police claiming that somebody was illegally parked on her lawn. They weren't, and she didn't even mention who it was that was parked there, so the police were mighty confused when they showed up. Karen pointed out the firefighters and started yelling again about how this was her property and she wanted them arrested for illegally parking. I heard everything because I was standing near the trucks to be a safe distance away from everything going on. At that point they put out the fire but were checking other things to make sure it was all good. One firefighter was hanging by the truck though, waiting for the rest of the crew. Officer, ma'am, you said that a car was illegally parked on your lawn. Karen, well, it's next to my lawn but it's still my property they are parked on. Arrest them now. Officer, the street is for public use. Anybody is allowed to park there. Aside from that, emergency vehicles are allowed to park anywhere, even on your lawn if it is really needed. They are putting out a fire and I suggest that you go back into your home and just wait for them to leave. Karen, you aren't going to arrest them? Officer, no, they haven't done anything illegal. I guess Karen doesn't like being told no because she didn't turn around and go into her home. Instead, she went right past the cop and jumped on the firefighter. She started cursing and hitting him for all of 10 seconds before the officer pulled her off and started putting her in cuffs. She was still yelling that it was her property, and she was just defending it because that person could have been trying to rob her. I think she was just saying any kind of excuse she could come up with, but I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. My crazy neighbor Karen really decided to attack a firefighter when a police officer was standing right there to see the entire thing. Where I live, police have body cams, so what she did was caught on tape for any judge to see. Now normally assault for a first offense might be a huge fine or community service. The thing is that a firefighter is considered a public servant job, and that makes the assault automatically a felony. From what I heard around the neighborhood, the stunt she pulled got her sent to jail for 2 years. I can't say for sure if that is true, but I can say that a month later I saw people come to take her things away, and then the house went up for sale. I wanted to get rid of my horrible Karen neighbor, but I didn't think that was how it was going to end. For anybody also wondering, I got the small gas leak fixed and the fire didn't do too much damage. I have to repaint the walls in the kitchen and get new curtains, but I came away pretty lucky. I don't know how Karen is going to behave in prison, but I can't imagine her learning fast that yelling at inmates, or the prison guards, will not end up well for her. The next story is titled, Lawn Karen. So, I make a living doing landscape maintenance, mostly for commercial properties and wealthy homeowners. Unsurprisingly, the wealthy homeowners tend to be the most difficult customers. I could probably write a book with the number of ridiculous requests I receive. I added a new customer, Karen, real name, to my weekly route recently, and the first visit to her home was yesterday. Using Google Maps, I bid the property for 1 hour of work. When I showed up, the place was a mess. It hadn't been serviced in months. I spent 2 hours making this place look about as perfect as it could. I cleaned up 2 half-dead palm trees, trimmed all the bushes, mowed, edged, string trimmed, and cleaned up all the leaves I was able to. An hour later, Karen calls my company, me, to complain about the work done. Apparently, they blew leaves into the corner of her property and left them. Well, that's complete bullshit, but okay, I'll entertain the nonsense. The leaves in question were already in the back corner of the property, embedded in the pine straw, as they'd been there for quite a while. Standard practice is blowing out any loose leaves from garden beds and mulching or bagging them, which had been done. Karen didn't really want to hear reason when I tried to explain this and insisted. I sent someone out to get the remaining leaves. I went back and got every leaf off of her property, including over 75% of the pine straw. Of course, she called again to complain about her missing pine straw, at which point I reiterated the same thing I told her before. I let her know I'd be happy to replace the pine straw for $400. I haven't heard back yet. Update. So, a week after the events in my initial post happened, I got a call from Karen. She asked if I was still willing to do the pine straw job for $400. I told her I'd have no problem with it, but asked why she'd want to use my services again when she wasn't satisfied with my prior work. Apparently, this lady discontinued services from 3 other landscape companies in the area and was having trouble finding anyone to do the job. I'm guessing that means they all fired her as a customer for being ducking ridiculous. I went and did the job this morning, and upon finishing, she was at least content enough with the work that she requested bi-weekly landscape maintenance moving forward. I politely declined, and when she asked why, I told her the truth. Ma'am, you seem to be a bit unreasonable, and I don't have the desire to deal with it. It didn't go over too well, but she paid for the work today and I left. Anyone wondering why I'd go back for the one job in the first place? It was an easy $200 profit for an hour of labor, why not? The next story is titled, You're Not Sharpening Those Drill Bits Correctly, Sergeant. TL. Doctor, Army Lieutenant discovers who actually runs the unit. I feel like WW2's chalk of military stories is one of those bottomless veins of gold, where you discover more, the more you dig. This story comes to us from my grandfather, from whom I inherit my love of pranks, most of my sense of humor, and probably my deep appreciation for schadenfreude. Like many of his stories, I heard this one as a kid many times, usually in front of a fire with snow falling outside, and always accompanied by an eye roll and a tart comment or two from my long-suffering grandmother. Gramps was a master machinist, going into the war, and he had quite a bit more experience than most people with engines and engineering. He was one of those guys that would look at just about anything mechanical with both reverence and a critical eye for making it better, and his knack for success inspired the Army Air Corps to snatch him up and plop him back down in the Midwest as a crew chief. My understanding, and I don't have any military experience here, but this is what I've been told, is that the senior NCO in charge of the maintenance, repair, upkeep, and general functioning of a squadron is the guy that actually owned those planes. From what Gramps always said, his attitude was that he loaned the pilots his planes, and they were expected to bring them back in roughly the same condition as they were in when they went up. When they were on the ground, the aircraft and everything used to maintain them was part of his kingdom. One fine day, a very new, fresh out of the box lieutenant, still with that new officer smell, introduced himself to Gramps and the other guys in the unit, as they were sitting in back of one of the maintenance bays, sharpening up a big double set of drill bits that had been getting more use than usual. And by introduced, I mean came in shouting about how they were doing it all wrong. He knew all about what they were doing, of course, and so just knew that the drill bit sharpening they were doing was actually going to ruin the bits and waste war resources, and did they want the Krauts to win? He showed them all the right way to do it and wasn't going to take any lip. My grandfather was not the sort of guy that was able to keep his mouth shut, which is probably another reason they put him in charge of mechanical things that tended not to get uppity with him. I also inherited this congenital condition, but that's a separate tragedy entirely. He protested that the lieutenant's direction actually was incorrect and got about 2/3 of the way into what he was about to say before the officer decided that he'd had enough back talk, and gave him weekend night shift guard duty. Gramps eyeballed him a bit, and would always say at this point in the story that he felt compelled to obey the lieutenant, because he was just so shiny, so he smiled and said, "Yes, sir," shut his mouth, and that was that. This was well before the Army had put tons of resources into things that weren't war critical. The airbase Gramps was stationed at was essentially a dirt, grass airfield, with hangars plopped down, and utterly without any pretense at pavement anywhere in sight. Consequently, the main traffic artery right behind the hangars, and which one had to go down when entering or leaving the base at all, was parallel to the airstrip and was the sort of thick, gooey, sticky, oobleck mud that one gets in Nebraska when it's been raining a lot and people have been driving army jeeps over the same patch of ground repeatedly. About halfway down, in the middle where the traffic had been heaviest, there was what Gramps described as a puddle, and which he later clarified was nearly 300 feet long, 30 feet wide, totally unavoidable, and which would swallow up the unwary interloper who didn't keep going. Go too fast, or too slow, and you're ducked one way or the other. Go through slowly and don't stop, and you'd probably be okay. Gramps positioned himself on Saturday night with his rifle and, grimly determined to protect this Nebraska airbase in the middle of fucking nowhere from the Huns, waited about 2/3 of the way down this Charybdis-like vortex, and waited. LT Shiny, along with a lot of the other guys on the base, really liked taking his weekend pass in town, because there were girls there, which any self-respecting soldier knew was an opportunity one did not lightly pass up, and which was the reason that Gramps had been assigned weekend sentry duty, as just an extra little suck-you. Pretty soon, Lieutenant Shiny came trundling back to base. And not in an army jeep. Oh no. His family evidently had money, or pull, or something, because he had an actual nice car to get around in, with those big swoopy fenders and the floorboards just outside the doors on both sides. He was playing it safe, Gramps said, by not driving down the middle of the road masquerading as a muddy pond. He was going along the side where it wasn't quite as deep and he was less likely to get stuck. But that also meant that the driver's side of the car was almost overhanging the deepest part of the mud. You can probably see where this is going. The duty of a sentry, of course, is to stop anyone they don't recognize from being on the base or near anything vital. And while Gramps knew perfectly well that Lieutenant Shiny was where he was supposed to be, he also knew that there was no way in hell during wartime he was going to get questioned about it. So he advanced, just as Lieutenant Shiny got abreast of a particularly bad spot and hollered, "Halt!" in his best drill instructor voice. It got the message across, and the car stopped immediately. Danger, Will Robinson. Window rolls down. Top of LT Shiny's head pokes out, and he yells back, "Lieutenant Shiny, sentry, returning from off-base pass." Gramps yelled back, from about 30 feet away, "Advance and be recognized," meaning, of course, "I can't see you clearly where you are, come to where I can see you. Or else." Frustrated, Lieutenant Shiny opened the door, dangerously close to the surface of the awaiting mud, and leaned out so the light caught him. He was in uniform, of course, all duded up as Gramps said, and wearing decidedly non-regulation boots with his uniform that came up to his knees and were polished to the sort of shiny finish that NASA uses on telescope mirrors today. He yelled back again who he was and was obviously frustrated and hoping he hadn't just gotten stuck. But he also hadn't gotten any closer as he'd been commanded to by the very armed sentry that had just challenged him, and on some level he knew it. Next steps. Racking around into the chamber as a warning, and a repeated command. Advance. And be recognized. Desperate, but knowing there was no way out of this other than forward, Lieutenant Shiny stood on the floorboards of the car, now just level with the surface and starting to inch closer to it slowly, and declared himself again, and was greeted with a loaded weapon pointed at him, and a repeated command to advance and be recognized. I asked Gramps once what would have happened if he'd actually shot Lieutenant Shiny, and he always said he was pretty sure he'd have been court-martialed at the least, but goddammit if he wasn't determined to make a point about this. And so, Lieutenant Shiny finally stepped off the sideboards of his car, sank immediately to his knees with muddy goo slopping over the top of his boots, and sadly advanced. Gramps let him get 2 steps forward, before shouldering his weapon again and snapping him the smartest of salutes. "Sir, thank you. You may proceed." Lieutenant Shiny sadly got back into his car and valiantly tried to get it moving again to no avail. Mud was everywhere, inside and out, mud flying everywhere as his wheels spun. And eventually, he gave up and trudged off to his barracks. By morning, they ended up having to use 2 jeeps and a come-along to yank that car out of the mud. Gramps said that he got talked to briefly by someone above Lieutenant Shiny and basically told don't do that again, but he said nothing much further came of it. Oddly enough, the subject of sharpening drill bits never came up again, and LT Shiny was always very careful about staying out of the maintenance bay unless he was going to be taking an aircraft up. The last story is entitled Stranger Demands That I Let Her Wander Around My Home. A few years ago, I used to live in a part of North London that was very pretty and very pricey. My ex and I lived in the 3-bedroom basement flat of a large converted Victorian house. One day, not long after moving in, I was home alone when the doorbell rings. I go out to the garden gate to find a pleasant-looking middle-class hipster type, in her early 30s. Me. "Hello, stranger." "Oh hi, I live a few houses down," add vague hand-flapping and no specifics, "and we want to add an extension. I'd love it if I can come in and look at your flat. Now you need to know that this area is a hot spot for burglaries as it is on the border of a rough estate. I once had someone steal the window wipers of my crap 20-years-old Renault Clio." There was also a lot of information circulating in the media about con artists who use any excuse to get in and case out your home. Me. "Oh, I'm really sorry but I'm going to have to say no, I just don't have the time right now." Stranger. Attitude shifts from smiley to pissed, "But it'll only take a minute, I don't see what your problem is." She then proceeds to switch between wheedling and ranting so I just slammed the door in her face. Now despite being a Londoner, born and raised, I do think that it's important to get on with your neighbors, but this woman set off all my internal alarms, especially when she tried to bully me to let her in, and was really vague as to where she actually lived. Sorry lady but that is not how you play nice with others. She may have been genuine and had never heard no before. But as a young woman who was frequently home alone due to my then boyfriend being a touring musician, I think that it was better to be safe than sorry. Thank you for listening.